Hello, everybody. This is on, yeah, it always gets louder if I talk a little bit. Hi, my name is Hille, and I'm very much honored to introduce the next talk. This will be kind of a double feature, because after this talk we will have time for a little Q&A, but then will be the talk of Astrid Dolber-Mankowski. So stay put, and it's going to be two talks. I'm very much honored to introduce Marie-Luise Angerer, and we decided to skip all the honorable academic mentions that are normally in place when a PhD student is introducing a professor. So I'm not going to tell you about all the books and papers and positions she held, wrote, and wrote. So instead, I'm going to read you a small quote in a bit, because in 2016, Marie-Luise Angerer held her inaugural lecture at the University of Potsdam, where she is a professor for media studies and media theory right now. You can read an extended version of the lecture in a wonderful short book. It's called Ecology of Affect, oder Affektökologien, and you can download it online, open access in both languages, so do so. This is on page 18 on the human, the rational, white, heterosexual, privileged, enlightened man we have been talking about for 2 days now, I think. Quote, when this conception of the human threatens to become brittle to its very core, and I think we have already heard in the day how brittle this body in trouble already is. When new conceptual frameworks favor a different perspective on the matters of life, on life as such, when language as a symbolic order implodes, then the question of the human, though it does not necessarily become obsolete, must surely be approached from a different angle. Marie-Luise Angerer dedicates her work to these new angles through new encounters with media, technology, science, and theory. Now we will hear a talk about something that already shook humans to its core, the unconscious. I mean, Freud, we all know what Freud did. Or better yet, the unconscious.
Non-conscious.
Non-conscious, sorry, the non-conscious. Yeah, that is specific in theory. And let's give it away for Marie-Luise Angerer. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Laura, very much for this introduction. And yeah, it will be around and about the unconscious, not the unconscious any longer, but the non-conscious. So this is my speculation about a new zone, as you can read here, a new zone where technology and life actually meet. And yesterday I had the chance to see Rimini Protocol with Thomas Melli, and this morning I thought, I have to rewrite a little bit my very short introduction, because this theater puts in the center right now the urgent question, machines like us, to paraphrase Ian McEwan's novel, Machines Like Me. And what makes the difference was the big question yesterday in Rimini Protocol, and for those who have the chance for tonight, please go and see it. And is there any difference between machines and humans? Language, emotions, even the unconscious, as installed by Sigmund Freud, as the most intimate and at the same time the most strangest dimension, has come under threat by sensor technology, artificial intelligence, nanotechnologies, and all the various names for it. Therefore, I'm going not to talk about differences, but about relations, new relations, shared skills and qualifications, so-called contact zones, sensitive zones between machines and us. And for these contact zones, I have put the notion, the non-conscious, in the center. It's not that I have coined this notion, and I'm going to introduce very, very briefly various approaches and theoretical approaches where this non-conscious is sort of, really popping up without a very sharp definition. So don't be disappointed if at the end you don't get a really high definition of what the non-conscious really is, but I'm going to approach this from various angles to see and to ask the question actually at the end, do we really need this notion of a non-conscious to understand what's going on between machines and humans, or the organic life and technology. At the dawn of the 21st century, the relations between bodies, environments, and mental worlds are being channeled via artificial intelligence and sensor technology. Body data communicate with environmental data, neuronal signals control bodies and ambient temperature, and the so-called little sisters, as Siri and many others are referred to by Rosalind Picard, the founder of affective computing, in order to play down fears of big data, increasingly organize and intervene in everyday routines. Such digital assistants are now being enthusiastically placed at the side of humans as the new others, as far-sighted planners and sensitive agents, non- or para-humans who will outdo or replace humans even in those places where they still differ from machines. Until the end of the 20th century, affect, emotion, and dimensions such as the unconscious counted as the human dimension that could be neither calculated nor entirely bypassed. Today, algorithms have long since begun to intervene to connect humans and machines on a psycho-cybernetic basis. This is not the end of humankind, the kind of physical and mental overcoming aimed for by transhumanism, but it certainly shifts the human away from the centuries-old fictitious center of humanism, requiring humans to organize new milieus with non-, para-, or post-human others, and by this to rethink the status of themselves as species among other species. I come to my next point, the gradations of sensitivity. For a philosophical reflection on the ongoing convergence between information technology and biotechnology, Isabelle Stengers has suggested a reference to the encyclopedist and materialist Denis Diderot. Firstly, with regard to a general transposition of sensing onto technical nature, he could be read as a direct descendant of a monistic naturalism. Secondly, however, Diderot is someone who does not impose dogmas, either epistemologically or ontological, instead appealing to his readers to take practice seriously and to look carefully at what happens, where, and how. This focus on practice, what Haraway might call staying with the trouble, also applies in the case of transformations such as the emergence of distributed sentience, when algorithms are cast as sentient entities and when smartness denotes a comprehensive capacity to both encode and decode feelings. In his sensualist epistemology, Diderot views sentience as a fundamental capacity with only gradual differences of degree, increasing from inanimate matter to passive and then active sentience. In D'Alembert's Dream from 1769, Diderot debates with the mathematician and physicist Jean-Baptiste Léron d'Alembert, with whom he co-published the encyclopedia, on the classical question of what might constitute the difference between a human being, an animal, a marble statue, a clavichord. And in his very famous passage, he wrote, "We humans are instruments gifted with sensation and memory. Our senses are simply keys that are struck by the natural world around us, keys that often strike themselves, and this, according to my way of thinking, is all that would take place in a clavichord organized as you and I are organized. There is an impression that has its cause either inside or outside the instrument. From this impression, a sensation is born." In other words, Diderot regards sentience as a fundamental quality, one that does not presuppose a self, a subject, a human being as such, which on the contrary supervenes later. The self in Diderot is one string among many others that resonate in harmony and disharmony. And life as resonance, as vibration and melody. The passage anticipates the melodic life principle of Jacob von Uexküll, who resorted to a figurative application of the musical concepts of melody and harmony to describe the adequate performance of an organism in its environment. Meaning in the natural score takes the place of harmony in the musical score, which works as a conjunction, or more precisely put, a bridge in order to unify two natural factors with each other. For as any bridge has its feet on both sides of the river, which it connects as point and counterpoint, which each other, these are linked to each other in music through harmony and in nature through the same meaning. Yet Uexküll's compositional theory of nature is also consonant with Baruch de Spinoza's conception of affect, something Deleuze and Guattari, so they do not say so quite explicitly, pinpoint when they introduce Uexküll as a Spinozist, highlighting the figure of the ritornelle, the refrain, as the connecting element. Whenever there is a transcoding, we can be sure that there is not a simple addition, but the constitution of a new plane as a surplus value, a melodic or rhythmic plane surplus value of passage or bridging. The two cases, however, are never pure. They are in reality mixed. And another concept that is relevant in this connection is the idea of modulation Deleuze introduces in his very famous postscript on the societies of control, offering a twofold definition. It is territorialization, it is territorializing liberation, the servers, the famous servers riding the wave, as well as the lifelong self-modulation with which the worker subject seeks to comply with late capitalism imperative of flexibility. And today, this afternoon, we have heard this discussion with Paula and the two artists presenting their performance tonight about this flexibility and the enhancement and this being purged all the time to do this. Yet this modulation is already described in the Southern Plateau, where Deleuze and Guattari, referring to Gabriel Tarde and his conception of the monad, pinpoint an inversion between quantifiable motions and quali characteristics that they identify as a form of mimesis. Belief and desires are the basis of every society because they are flows and as such quantifiable. They are veritable social quantities, whereas sensations are qualitative and representations are simply resultants. If then the self is not necessarily a prerequisite for sentience, you can say the self, the subject, the human being, the question that is increasingly urgent in light of the many other agencies, such as cyborgs, parahumans, real humans, operating systems. The very urgent question becomes, does everyone and everything sense? And if you say yes, then in which ways? Do they differ or they don't differ at all? Could this comparison between human and other agencies now be transposed? I mean, the Diderot's comparison between the marble statue, the clavichord, the human being, and so on. Could this comparison be transposed onto what Luciano Parisi has called technosensation? Only introducing technology, instead of a clavichord, into a kind of tactile exchange between agents, such as bacteria, viruses, and cells, as they exchange and transfer information via chemical processes such as quorum sensing, biofilm formation, and sporulation. Parisi draws these examples from the micro-ontological approach of environmental scientist Murray Heard, who describes bacterial communities as performing collective sensing, distributed information processing, and gene regulation of individual bacteria by the group. Heard has adapted Haraway's concept of companion species to her concept of co-evolution and co-enactment among non-species, demonstrating that bodies operate in interactive fashion on a cellular level in both genetic and morphological terms. The concept of interaction was introduced by Karen Barat to stress, with reference to Niels Bohr quantum theory, that rather than two poles entering into a relation with one another, it is actually relationality itself that causes them to emerge as poles. Affect and algorithm. In her work, Luciana Parisi transfers this micro-ontological process from bacterial communities to her technosensorial model in which environmental and body data interconnect. A few years later, she used Alfred North Whitehead's concept of prehension to create a concept of affective thinking that transfers the double moment in his concept, appropriation and abstraction. So prehension, you can read here. It's a pretty simple definition, but it's quite a complicated model. But the main definition, the main modes are appropriation and abstraction at the same time is the two ways of defining prehension. And she takes this double moment to sensation and cognition, appropriation and abstraction, to sensation and cognition as base conditions. In this way, she argues it becomes possible to understand mathematical calculation and information processing in both humans and machines as open and reversible rule-based systems. And she writes not only because they are responsive to the physical environment which they seek to simulate, humans and machines the same way, but more importantly because their discrete operations become infected and changed by informational randomness. Now this is very important, and you might remember the last sentence by Thomas Mellis' Avatar yesterday. At the end, he said, you know, the difference between you and me is contingency. So this was the last word he said yesterday night. And I thought this is quite, I mean, to bring it together, to see, you know, in which ways these ways of trying to understand how humans and machines actually do operate, that there are many different levels at the moment where this is really tried, you know, to make it comprehensible. So the apparent opposition between affect and computation is here dissolved, and to reveal that dynamic automation is central to the capitalization of intelligible function. Apprehension is, as you can read here, an operation in which an actual entity grasps, not just take over some other entity, and makes that entity an object of its experience. Apprehension is a concrete fact of relatedness. It has a subject, an object or datum that is prehended, and a subjective form. And this subjective form, now this is quite important to understand that it has nothing to do actually with a subject. The subjective form of apprehension is the particular manner in which that subject prehends that object. Subjective forms are forms of emotion, consciousness, purpose, etc. Apprehension need not to be conscious. Indeed, most prehensions are not. This is quite important. And within this model, Whitehead has another term which plays quite an important role in my own work. It's the term blind emotion, with which he characterizes the ongoing, totally non-conscious act of perceiving. So, you know, long before we perceive something and we see something really, there's an ongoing process long before that. This means that at the moment of the transition from energy to information, from affect to intelligible functions, a dynamic automation comes into play, which Parisi understood as prehension. In the next step, this then allows her to refer to media technologies as prehensive machines of the unarticulable and the unrepresentable, which not only renders blind emotion, now this is the blind emotion, the ongoing non-conscious operation capable of seeing, but also gives it to the corresponding social dimension. That means this goes on step by step and becomes a feeling, feeling becomes conscious, perceiving, deciding, reacting. This makes it abundantly clear that the affective dimension is added here as a so-called joker, allowing Parisi to juggle between visceral, biological, cognitive, and technical processes. Data become affective data because they are affected via their own movements in the sense of an infection or contagion. The same goes for the abrupt switch to sentience. In Parisi's idiom, a techno-ecology of sensation simply means that energy is translated into information. But the question still remains open. What happens in this switch? A switch or a difference that is key to the next question: how do algorithm and affect cooperate? If we understand this zone of non-conscious as the one where algorithm and affects do meet, or in a way come together, cross-merge or whatsoever. The non-conscious cognition. Now, this is the first example of another author, Catherine Hille. She has introduced this notion of the non-conscious cognition. In the cognitive sciences, the notion of a cognitive unconscious, now this is still the unconscious, has been under discussion since the mid-1990s. In her book, Unthought, which came out last year or 2 years ago, Catherine Hille adds the technical concept of the non-conscious cognition, localizing the interconnection of media infrastructure, environment, and human and non-human agency in the cognitive non-conscious. She emphasizes the processual quality of cognition and expands it to include a non-conscious dimension, including qualities such as flexibility and the capacity to adapt and to evolve. This is the zone where technology and biology meet, where the distinction between human and non-human actors shifts towards one between, you can see it here, cognizers and non-cognizers. The former are actors, the latter agents. Cognizers, and this is quite interesting, include humans, biological organisms, and technical systems, while non-cognizers include material processes and anorganic objects. As Hille stresses, however, this is not a binary system, but an interpenetration that is continual and pervasive, that flows through, within, and beyond the humans, non-humans, cognizers, non-cognizers, and material processes. The non-conscious cognition that Hille situates on the level of neuronal processes, defining it as inaccessible to consciousness, can now be empirically detected, she writes, proving to be neither an exclusively human nor an exclusively technological matter. Instead, this zone is currently rearranging itself. Now, this is quite interesting that she is also writing that it's rearranging actually at the moment itself, this zone. And affect plays an interesting role in this process. For as Armin Beverungen points out in his essay on cognitive capitalism, non-conscious cognition takes place, quote, in the human body in the neural processing of information on a level described in current media theory using the term affect. This is his only point. He doesn't explain it in any other ways. So just leave it that way for a moment. Now I come to my last point and to the main part of my discussion of the non-conscious zone. In her foreword to the user unconscious, Patricia Clough offers an overview of current approaches that deal in one way or another with the concept of a technical unconscious. She emphasizes the concept of originary technicity, which she considers to be the basis for such an unconscious, underpinning her argument with a list of approaches that integrate other than humans in their thinking. In Desire After Affect, my book which came out in English in 2014, written at the height of an affective turn, so the German version came out in 2007, I traced the consequences of a shift from the unconscious towards the affective, stressing that the latter includes the potential for connections, new connections between humans and their non-human companions and technical environments. When my book was published in 2007, the affect debate as a whole was still a very atechnical, celebrating the concept of affect as a new freedom as compared with its restricted role in psychoanalysis. Since then, thinking as and in relation has become more established. Key authors here being Haraway, Latour, Stengers, and many, many others. And concepts like environment, Umwelt, and human, non-human species have become theoretical commonplaces. Against this backdrop, the question of a technical unconscious and the assumptions upon which it is based must be approached afresh. Because affecting has to be understood as a technical term, like Whitehead's definition of feeling or the blind emotion. And it plays a decisive role here, something that has been overlooked, as I'm arguing, or been ignored in every approach, not being integrated into any theory at all. Also, I cannot go into detail here. Concepts like Catherine Malabou's neuroplasticity must be expanded to include a technical dimension, since this would allow the inner or core self postulated by such theories to be brought into step as an effective self and thus as a sequence in time with a media-technical rhythm. At first glance, this may recall Bernard Stiegler's Techniques and Time, in which he speaks of an industrial grammaticalization of the mind. I would only add one key element here and speak of a non-conscious zone that is inscribed into these processes. For whereas Stiegler's grammaticalization inscribes itself into the mode of remembering, this non-conscious zone must be situated where a perceiving without perception takes place in its technical timing in seconds, in a Taktung, beats, cycles, not in remembering, but without it, and also not in an unconscious that docks onto a linguistically translated discrimination, repression, or contempt, but which is primarily a technical event. Against this, concepts like habits and plasticity, pretty old concepts, take on a new semantic charge in the discussion surrounding the non-conscious, for they point to malleability, to self-shaping and being shaped, and to the basic non-conscious dimension in which this takes place. This means that William James' understanding of the plasticity of brain tissue that shapes itself via constant repetition and that is reshaped by disruptions or new connections cooperates with a concept of habit like that introduced by Wendy Chun with regard to the new media. Chun quotes James and his social definition of habits, which, as he wrote, guarantee social differences and stabilization, and Chun now transfers this view to the way humans relate to non-humans and their environments. All of this calls for a media theory of affective processes that takes seriously the autonomy of affect as postulated many years ago in 1996 by Brian Masumi, connecting it with the temporal figure of dislocation. And let us briefly recall the three operations of the affective as I have defined it in the mentioned book, Ecology of Affect, as an operational force, as a connective, a disruptive, and a translative force, as the temporally beared momentum of a relation, a blank, a gap opening. This also means that the question can no longer be how affect and politics operate together, but rather how a set of technical givens has to be introduced here that causes politics, its players, and its strategy to emerge as belated manifestations. Consequently, what is needed is less a theory of affect than a media theory of affective processes that takes the autonomy of affect seriously and links it with the temporal figure of dislocation. This might then make it easier to grasp the fact that it's not so important what is said, written, and tweeted, and more the rapid-fire appearance of gestures and facial expressions, hands, voices, and so on, that connect or fails to connect with the intended bodies of users, consumers, readers, and so on in the anticipatory tempo of a technical affective translation. It's more about the perceiving without and the knowing without that connects or fails to connect. And I come to my very last point. As a first draft, then, the zone of the non-conscious can be understood as a zone in which temporal shifts, dislocations, transitions, connections take place that translate bodies and their surroundings into one another. It may be useful to dig out a concept coined 2 decades ago by Zoe Sophia when she spoke about container technologies, proposing a then progressive model of subjectification that is both mental and technical. In the face of advanced and ever-advancing microsensor ubiquity and connectivity, one can justifiably speculate on whether and how, under the given technical conditions, the formerly unconscious dimension will take on a new shape and produce non-conscious symptoms. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Questions?
It was a running through.
Yeah, it was a running through. But I do think that there are people here who do have questions. And it's totally fine to just ask, what is affect? Just so you know. Because it's not even that easy to say.
What are parahumans?
Always with the mic.
What are parahumans?
What are parahumans? Parahumans was actually, the para was coined by Zoe Sophoulis, the one I've just quoted at the end. And she wrote already 20 years ago, she speculated about this kind of, she didn't call them non-humans or cyborgs, but of course, she was discussing this parahuman humanity within the context of the cyborgs and Donna Haraway's manifesto. And she actually said, that there might be a kind of, new otherness coming up. And she called it, in a speculative way, parahumans. And then, for quite a long time, I've never heard this term again. And in our book, on actually, she was at that time in Bochum at the Maria Hoder professorship when we had how did I call the symposium? I can't remember actually the title I did at the KHM. And there she gave this talk. And then after a while, I saw this term coming up again here and then within this new technical shifts and the para suddenly point. Not to say it's not a non-human. It's not that this dichotomy between humans and non-humans, but this kind of in between, a kind of overlapping, a shared thing, a kind of shared being.
I had a question bouncing off. Hello.
Here you are.
This lovely concept of container technologies and this distinction that Zoe Sophia brings up between sort of the visibility of tools and weapons and sort of the objects that catch our attention when we're writing about technology, and how difficult it is to figure the container as this passive medium within which things are taking shape. And so this is a very half-baked question, but I was wondering if there was any link that you would be drawn to make between the distinction between the conscious and the unconscious, and that distinction that Zoe Sophia draws between containing and sort of acting. In the references that you put forward, there's a tension there.
Yeah. Zoe Sophoulis, she does not talk about the conscious and the unconscious. A little bit the unconscious. It was still, her references at that time were still, a psychoanalytical approach, very much Melanie Klein, but then also Heidegger and everything. But actually, when I reread her article, I thought, it might be quite interesting to take it up again, this term of the container technology, and really to rethink it against the background of today's technological environment, because this is a very different container. It's even bigger than at the time when she 20 years ago when she talked about this container technology. And actually the funny thing, or the quite interesting thing for me, is that at the moment, I mean, over the last years, writers such as Le Guin, with her container, with her bag theory, is attracting more and more attention. And I thought this is quite interesting, that even in an approach which has nothing to do, not at first sight, with technology, has this bag, and the bag, where things are put in. And then, I came back to Zoe's container technology, and then I thought, this could be maybe extended, to this non-conscious zone. I was really, rushing through, to show, in how many there are so many different aspects, to think about it, and there are so many terms which are totally overloaded and semantically overloaded, and really to think, does it help to have a new term, which is actually the non-conscious, maybe not that new, but new in the sense the way it is defined, and maybe the container might be a little help. Over there. Laura,
I get a sign that this will be the last question, okay. So maybe you can put them together, and then maybe you can decide which one you want to answer more. And there will still be, since the microphones are on,
there will make it quite interesting.
And there will still be time tomorrow morning at 10:30. There will be a roundtable downstairs. So please join if you want to discuss some more. It's just like it's possible and open for everyone.
Oh, hello. So in the context of actor here.
Here. Okay.
In the context of, because you mentioned the Latour. So in the context of actor network theory, I'm trying to place the affective turn, or trying to understand it under that context. So would you say that understanding that the conscious and unconscious are really, in a way, or to put another way, that sentience does not require consciousness? How would you put it in terms of the relationship between mediators and intimidators regarding actor network theory? I don't know if I'm making myself clear though.
Yeah, I'm in the actor network theory. There is no affect. There are no emotions. It's not a concept Latour or others are working on. So it's it's the network, and it's the relationship, within this network or among these networks. But it's not about that they ask, how these operations actually are working. So, I would say, the affect is for me as something which, of course, came up, in the 90s, and it was a kind of celebration that, the body and the materiality and everything, is coming back, and now we are really seeing, that we can't think without a body, and of course, the body is always something which is uncontrollable, and it's effective in its own movements. Now, but this, the Latour thing, it's not, I would say, it's not, you can use it, and say, networks are operating, then you can ask, in which ways are they operating, and then you, of course, you might introduce, the term of the non-conscious, or as, and the affect plays an important role in the non-conscious, not in the unconscious.
Okay, thank you very much.
Markus?
Quickly.
Okay.
Quickly.
Try it as quick as I can. I would like to ask again, you know this question already, but I'd like to ask again about the affect quality or the philosophical temperament behind these kind of relation theories. Because you could argue, as a critic, you could argue that this kind of connectiveness, this kind of relationism, is a kind of heir to the post-structural multi-structuralism, which ended some time ago, and is now the affective theory is a kind of heir to this, and all it does is to save us from the horror of being not related.
Yeah, but I mean, sorry to interrupt, but this is exactly that maybe I didn't underpin it very clearly. It's also about, I mean, I said, you know, I'm talking about relations and about similarities and overlapping sounds, but also, you know, the failure of connectedness, the failure of the disruption is quite important. And actually, you know, if we talk about biology and technology, I mean, it's the, you know, these kind of sensitive zones, you know, must be really taken seriously in the term. What I said in the beginning, I have quoting Isabel Stengers, you know, take practice seriously and see in which ways, how does it work, where does it not work actually, and you know, not to embrace this kind of, you know, ubiquitous relatedness all over the world.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks.